Hello, and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. I'm Mr. 50mm. And also, this lens on the D600, it's 50mm. So today, we're going to actually review a 50mm lens. Specifically, it's the lens that the community picked after I asked what brand of 50mm lenses should I review. And Nikon won out, so I decided from my pool of Nikon lenses to look at the high-speed 50 1.2. Now, this is the 50mm F1.2 AI lens, not the AIS, and we'll get into that a bit later. So this is exciting. We're finally having a look at a 50mm lens. It only took me 6 months since the start of this channel to get to it. So a bit of story before we get into the review part. This lens has been in my collection for a really long time, since about 2012. Before that, my uncle actually had the lens, and he bought that when it was new in Japan, sometime in the late 70s, early 80s. And eventually it was gifted over to me. So I'm the second owner of this lens. And who knows, maybe I'll be the last. And one day, maybe I'll review the Nikon F2 that he also gave to me as well. What is the 50mm f1.2 AI lens? How's it different than the AIS variant? Well, the Nikon 50mm f1.2 AI is a manual focus F-mount lens. It has a 52mm filter thread diameter. Its optical design is 7 elements in 6 groups, and I'll pop an image of that up now. The lens itself was introduced in 1978, and it was replaced in 1981 with the AIS variant, which had a production run until kind of very recently. I can't find a specific date when they actually stopped shipping these things out, but the page for the 50mm f1.2 AIS was only very recently moved to Nikon's archived section. Now, again, this is a manual focus only optic, but the aperture does couple with supported cameras. Now that includes most of the DSLRs that have coupling tabs. The exceptions are the entry-level models like the D40, D80, D3000, D5000. Now this is not an exhaustive list, you can look that up, but you can still mount the cameras on these you can still mount the lens on the cameras, but there'll be no support for metering, so you can only shoot it in the manual mode. The lens itself is otherwise set up with a 7-bladed aperture, and it's not rounded, and it can focus as close as 0.5 meters and stops down to f16. Now, the focus throw on the AI variant is quite long at 190 degrees, so you can really nail the focus. So let's have a quick look at how much throw that really is. It's a long ways. Now, the weight of the lens comes in at roughly 390 grams, roughly 0.195 noct, or 0.39 plena. Now, I couldn't find the original MSRP of the AI version of the lens, but the AIS variant was listed for 75,000 yen, or roughly 476 USD, or roughly $655 in Canadian funny money. Now, if you saw the AI and AIS variant beside each other, it would kind of be difficult to tell which one of these is which. However, there are some indications. If you look at the lens, see if I can hold it up, the F16 marking on the AI variant is blue, where the AIS is orange. Now, the technical difference between the two is that the AIS variant features a automatic aperture control and increased aperture increment precision than the AI variant. In modern DSLRs, this isn't really a massive factor, so I'm not really going to go over that from this point on. However, the other differences from the AI and AIS variants that are worth mentioning are that the AIS variant seems to weigh a bit less than the AI variant, coming in at 360 grams, so 30 grams less. The AIS variant also has 9 aperture blades. That's 2 more than 7. I counted. And I can verify that 7 is smaller than 9. Something else to consider is the focus throw of the AIS variant is shorter at 110 degrees, so it will be a little more tricky in some cases to perfectly nail that focus. I do actually prefer the longer 190 degree throw of this variant, and I'm not just saying that because I own it. Now, the last thing that I would like to mention is that the AI variant does sell for a bit less than the AIS variant, where the AI variant currently goes for around 250 to 350 USD, where the AIS variant typically sells for 300 to 450 USD. At least that's what I'm seeing on the eBays. Now, optical formula for both of these lenses are the same, so you won't generally notice a massive difference between the two optically. In fact, well, you shouldn't, since they're pretty identical, other than bokeh rendition. Sorry, bokeh rendition stopped down. Operation and feel. If you're into manual glass, you will not be let down by this lens. On a DSLR, it's really well balanced, it feels really solid, since most of the weight is towards the body anyways. Again, being a manual focus lens, the focus ring is sublime. It is well dampened and it's fairly smooth. And like I said, on the AI variant, the 190 degree throw really lets you quite easily nail focus, even though it might come at a bit of speed for, twisting the lens to the correct position. Now, if you're coming from using a autofocus lens in manual mode, this will feel really nice by comparison. You won't feel any chunkiness, you won't feel any weird grittiness. You're just gonna get a nice, well-dampened, smooth focus throw. This is even true if you compare it against the more modern, like ultrasonic lenses or Nikon's variant of that, whatever it is. So yeah, overall focus throw, excellent. Now, on the on this lens, your aperture has mainly full stop clicks, with the exception of one partial click from f1.2 to 1.4. Then from there, full stops the rest of the way. So, if you want your half stops, no dice on this lens. The clicking action is nice and snappy, and you can generally feel it through and scroll through your aperture. It's a nice thing, especially, on my copy at least. Now, for this video, I'm mainly going to shoot the lens on DSLRs. But I do actually really like using these manual focus lenses on mirrorless cameras, despite the weird unbalanced nature of it, since the camera body tends to be fairly narrow and you gotta still use a lens adapter, which usually has a chunky piece of metal tube in front of your lens, kind of unbalancing the camera as a whole. However, with the mirrorless systems, I do really like the fact that you can really punch in the zoom and very accurately focus the lens. Now, it's generally fine on DSLRs, especially if you had a full frame one with a nice bright finder, but I generally don't find that using the the AF/manual focus green dot of approval is all that great. It's generally good, but I do prefer the punch-in on a mirrorless camera. That being said, I do know there are people out there that like switching the focusing screens out of their DSLRs and using a split prism or whatnot, and with that I assume it's probably pretty good. I haven't used a split prism in quite a while, but I still, when I think back, I think I still would rather have the punch-in of a mirrorless camera. Now, shooting wide open on a DSLR is still kind of challenging. Again, even using the Nikon focus indicator, the depth of field is so narrow that, even if you confirm focus, by the time that you recompose, or if you're doing a focus recompose thing, you might throw off the depth of field there and miss. Again, this is where on a mirrorless camera, your punch-in is really easy because you can move your punch-in zone to where you want to frame your subject and just zoom in and make sure it's focused there. Now, that being said, when you are actually doing that, either on a DSLR or on your mirrorless camera, again, the action being very smooth and being very accurate is quite good on this lens. Now, again, if you're using it on a mirrorless camera, this might be an even easier thing for you if you like using focus peaking. But that being said, at wide open settings, I do sometimes find that the peaking settings do need to be tweaked for this lens, as it's a bit, low contrast, wide open, and the peaking might be a bit janky. Image quality. So how does this lens perform? This is probably the meat and potatoes of the video. I assume that's what most people are probably wondering about. Now, despite being an engineer, I'm probably not going to pull up the MTF charts. This is definitely more of a subjective look at how the lens renders, although I will try to generally comment on performance, but don't expect me to be measuring how much Loca there is or, measuring the resolving power of the lens overall. I'll probably just be using fairly generic phrasing for that part. First off, though, I do want to say, wide open. If you are used to using a modern 50 1.2, one of the very expensive ones from Canon, Nikon, or Sony, this will not be your cup of tea. These modern ultra-fast 50s are usually very, very sharp all the way across the frame, provide crazy contrast, wide open, and have quite a bit more effort to try to get a perfectly technically well-rendered bokeh. I'll link to an article about modern 50s by DP Review if you are curious about those. That being said, a modern fast 50 tends to be way heavier, way bigger than these vintage fast 50s, and also way more expensive. And again, these modern lenses tend to be, more technically perfect. And now that's clearly not a bad thing. We've had some fairly good lens progress in the past, 40 years. So that's all that to say, this lens here is nothing like the modern fast 50s. The Nikon in particular has a bit of a glow and haze wide open, so if you're shooting in a strong source of light, keep out for that. It also will probably flare pretty good. That being said, sharpness I actually didn't find to be all that bad around the center. And especially if you use this on a crop camera, it'll be fairly consistent all the way across the frame. That being said, contrast overall and color saturation is going to suffer a bit. Vignetting is also pretty harsh, wide open, but this is fairly easy to correct in modern software. How many stops is it in the corners versus the center? Enough. A correctable amount. But overall, for wide open performance, this is about what you'd expect for lenses of the era. It looks vintage, because it is vintage. But here's the thing though. If you stop this lens down to f2, it gets actually very sharp and contrast is really good. Generally, haze is fairly well controlled at this point. And I know, you're not wide open anymore, but it's generally sharper than other 50s at the same aperture, which is very nice. I find, at least with my copy, that maximum sharpness and contrast all around the frame is good between f4 to 5.6. I personally think that at this f-stop, it is very incredible all the way across the full frame. Now, sure, your bokeh is going to be more angular. It's going to be a bit not so circular, but I don't mind that. But to the point of bokeh, I'll be honest, this lens can get very jittery. So if you're into the vintage jittery bokeh look, that's good. But if you are, technically speaking, looking for bokeh balls that melt or blend together perfectly at all times, no dice. On this lens, you can also induce the cat's eyes and a bit of swirlage in the corners when you're shooting wide open. If you are focused in close enough to an object, it will do it. Now, just for fun, we'll compare the 50mm 1.2 Nikon to my Canon 50mm 1.2 LEF lens. I know, this isn't an ultra-modern fast 50, but it's a fast 50 that I happen to own, so we'll have a look. And we'll be doing another very sciencey comparison. Again, in my backyard, the crucible of sciencey testing. This time, we'll be having a look at my bird feeder of sciencey optic examination, or BFSOE for short. Catchy. Now, at f1.2, you can see that the Nikon is quite a bit less contrasty. You get that haze around. But when you actually zoom in and have a look, the sharpness is reasonably similar. The bokeh is jittery. But I mean, it's jittery on both lenses, but the Nikon does have more jit. Now, let us scroll through the aperture ranges. And again, when we're at f4, you can see that both lenses are very sharp across the frame. Contrast is very good. And I do find that on the Canon, the bokeh is nicer. Again, preference though, for someone that does like again, more vintage rendering, you do you. And now we'll get on to the photo gallery. Now in the gallery, the photos will either be shot on the D600 or D200, and I'll put a label on each photo just so that you know which one it is. Let's have a look. Conclusion. So if you are looking for that vintage fast 50, this could be it. Again, it's cheaper than the AIS variant. The optical formula is the same. And as long as you're not super worried about the aperture blade count, I'd recommend it. But, if your end goal is 18 pointed sun stars, clearly you probably want the AIS. But I would happily sacrifice the 18 pointed stars for a longer focus throw. That's just my preference. And again, the AI version is fairly cheap. I think actually when you compare it to a modern 50 1.8 autofocus lens, they're actually kind of similar. And if you are looking for that vintage 50 look, this will give it to you in spades. Now, I'd also recommend this Nikon's Fast 50, just because the Nikon F-Mount is fairly adaptable. So if you want to shoot it on a Nikon DSLR, you can do that. If you want to shoot it on a Canon DSLR, you could do that. If you want to shoot it on an Olympus 4/3 DSLR, you could also do that. And just with most other older DSLR or older SLR lenses, it'll go on any mirrorless camera. But I do find with Nikon in particular, you get one fairly flexible lens that'll go on almost anything. So in a nutshell, for vintage renderings, this lens earns a thumbs up from me. It's not too expensive, focusing is very nice, and weight-wise for a lens of the era, it's average. But build quality is excellent. So I think that about wraps up this review. Thanks to everyone who voted. I'll probably put up another poll again just to see what 50mm I should look at next. I've got lots. So, are you interested in Nikon's fast 50s? Do you have one of these 1.2 AI or AIS variants? What about other 50mm? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Till next time. Bye.